Okay, mixing with Mike. Plugin of the week is the VocalRider with Sidechain. And this is something that has been requested a lot, and it's very confusing to understand. VocalRider, if you're not familiar, is a plugin that is specifically designed to recreate the automation techniques that have been used by mix engineers for years, since automation, really began in moving fader form, in the form of a plugin. So one of the techniques that many engineers would do, and sometimes spend hours, and I've done this myself, I hated it. It's the most dreadful thing. Sitting there for hours writing the syllable every word and making it so that you can hear the essence of every word. And this is, you'd think that, oh, this is something you do when the vocal is really loud in the speaker. And actually, it's more often something that you do when the vocal is really tucked into the music. Because in order to hear all of those breaths and all of the ends of words and all the articulations and the subtleties of the vibrato and all those things, in order to get them to come out, you need to ride them in. And you need to ride them in sort of a musical way. And what it does is it will pull the vocal forward in the speaker. One of the things that, like, we always talked about movement of vocal in a speaker. So generally, the techniques for making a vocal do something in the speaker are varied based on what you want to do. You can raise a vocal up in the speaker. So sometimes you listen to a mix and it sounds like the vocal's on top of all the music, above all the music. And sometimes that's a very classic, like R&B kind of thing to do. And then sometimes you want the vocal to sort of really, really be tucked in the track. And that's like a classic, like alternative rock thing. You want it to sound like it's part of the band. And then there's a thing where you want the vocal to sound out in front of the mix. Like you want every articulation and every word and every little bit to be heard. And when that is the case, it gives this characteristic of closeness. Like when you're up close to somebody, then you hear all those subtle articulations of everything that they say. Okay, and you smell the bad breath, and you get all the things that go along with being up close to somebody, right? Like they always, someone always said, it's like, if somebody offers you a breath mint, never turn it down. I guess, I don't know, good advice. Maybe they're trying to tell you something, I guess, is the essence of the story. But the bottom line is that the idea in terms of the riding and those techniques had been turned into a plugin by Wave. So they studied this carefully. And what they did was they went and created this plugin that sort of automates this process of automation. And they even included a whole automation system within it, because this does take up CPU cycles. And so you can actually write the fader movement as you set it up into automation on your host application. And then when you go into read mode, it can play back those rides, and thus all it's really doing is effectively riding gain. Okay, and the plugin doesn't have to turn on its interactive electronics. So the settings for this are pretty straightforward. You have a fast response and a slow response. So the idea here is that, do you want the VocalRider to be very active and aggressive in terms of the way that it approaches the vocal, or do you want it to act or interact slowly? And then there's a sensitivity or target setting. I'm sorry, that's the sensitivity setting. The target setting, and what the target setting does is it allows you to set like where the basic level that you want it to be centered around. So if you have a vocal, for example, and I'm going to take out the instrumental track here for us. What I really want to do is I want to
float across the world in your big balloon. You made magic from my daydreams and turn my darkest hours to bright afternoons.
So what I'm doing here is I kind of want to set a sensitivity, or I'm sorry, a target range where the rider is kind of moving up and down around my centered stop point, which I can designate here. So I can set a max gain on the up and on the down side. And what this does is it sort of confines the VocalRider fader. So I can go as much as 12 dB up or down. So if I really make it high and really make it low, it can get, and I make it really aggressive.
I float across the world in your big balloon. You made magic from my daydreams.
And it looks like it's mostly riding down.
To bright afternoons. I float across.
And what you'll get is you'll get some kind of movement. So sometimes what you get is a lot of interactive, like a lot of radical movement up or down. So to me, generally, and obviously it depends on the source. Generally, what I've found to be most effective is to confine the vocal rider within a few dB, like plus minus 3 dB, which is quite a lot, or even plus minus 2 dB, and let it kind of work within a specific range. And because sometimes what it will do is it'll just sort of take off on you. And then, like at the end of words, it'll just make this breath insanely loud. So one of the keys is really getting it to react properly, right?
I float across the world in your big balloon. You made magic
So you can see how it brings up
from
that
my
breath.
daydreams and turn my darkest hours to bright afternoons. I float.
And where this thing in the middle here, this is where it goes back to. This is sort of like its default end position. So when it doesn't sense any audio signal, rather than just maxing out in gain, it's going to go back to this resting point. So that's all fine and good. You set your target, you get your sensitivity, you get it reacting the way that you want it to react. You determine how aggressive that you want it to be with a fast or slow switch. It gives you some indications of, how interactive it's doing with the, that it's riding or idle or whatever. You could see that with the movement. And then you could adjust your output gain accordingly. Generally, I kind of end up leaving this normal because I try to get it so that it's averaging going up and down within my set area here. And this is kind of helping to even out the performance. That's really what I'm looking for this for. So when I bypass it, it should feel like the vocal is less alive. And when I put it back in, the vocal should feel more vibrant and alive and forward in the mix. And that's really what I'm listening for. So let's just...
I float across the world in your big balloon. You made magic from my daydreams and turn my darkest hours to bright afternoons.
So you can hear like the movement there and all of that. So let's kind of go now to what the next stage is. And the next thing is that this performer is now singing to music. So relative to all of this, like in the classic SSL consoles, they created this status called trim and an automation status. And what trim status does is it takes all the existing rides that you've written in, and relatively you can then trim those all up or down by fixed amounts, or not even by fixed amounts, by whatever amount you move the fader. So let's say that I just did a whole bunch of rides on a particular series of words that were like this, all these radical movements that were really, really cool. And I like the way it sounds. It's like overall, the mix gain is a little bit too low because the music at that particular point in the song all of a sudden jumps out a little bit more. So what I do is I go to my trim fader, I pop into trim status, I raise the level up, and I'm now riding those same rides. I'm keeping those same rides exactly the way I written them, and I've made them go and be a little bit louder, so they sit in the mix exactly where I want. So this was a very, very common technique in terms of working with vocal writing, okay, and automation. And the SSL was brilliant for it, and it's part of what made it such a classic console to go to. Some of the moving fader systems, that was it was a more difficult way to go about it, and so they had like these offline ways of adding a dB or tenths of dBs between timecode points and all kinds of stuff like that. Very mathematical. The SSL system was very musical. So what they did here with Waves is they said, well, why don't we use the sidechain technology? So if we select a bus for a sidechain, I just happen to select bus 25, and we feed from our music stem all of that, or all of the music. So this would be a send that you would either send from all of the tracks post fader, really important, okay, bus 25, or if you have like mix stems, like if you bus out all of your individual audio with effects into the stems, then you can from here feed those into the sidechain of VocalRider. The idea is that if the music pushes louder, it will move the vocal up accordingly to follow the overall dynamic of the music. So in other words, if I have this down, the vocal will have a certain place in the music.
I float across the world in your big balloon. You made magic from my
So you can see here with this adjustment I just made.
my darkest hours to bright afternoon.
Okay, so the vocal sits in a certain place that is set by my sensitivity settings. Okay, but now if I want to make this interactive with the music, I can now raise up the music. So anything that's coming in through the trigger signal, and so right now I just have a stereo instrumental feeding into this. Now this determines how sensitive it is. So you'll notice that the more I raise this up, the more it'll push the vocal, right?
I float across the world in your big balloon. You made magic.
So now you notice that the rides are louder.
And turn my darkest hours to bright afternoon.
Whereas if I turn it off,
I float across the world in your big balloon. And because of your love, I found faith in my destiny. Just the way that you taught me to truly.
So you can see here, generally, they're much lower. When I crank this up,
I float across the world
it's maxing out.
in your big balloon. You made magic from my daydreams and turn my darkest hours to bright afternoon.
So what it's doing is it's interactively working with the music to set the basic volume. So the idea is that if, like on a jazz record or something along the lines of this, the music is moving much more dynamically. You're getting like these dynamic changes, and the vocal is singing along with that, and their vocal performance may grow in intensity or get, more intense for one section of the song along with the group. That would be the typical thing, but they still may get lost in the track because you're compressing them and you're doing all kinds of other things to even out the performance. And so here what this is doing is it's allowing you to feed that musical performance in here and say, hey, when the band starts really kicking and knocking in there, then the vocal level rides are going to still happen, but they're going to happen at a little bit of a louder level. And, I didn't, I kind of laid this out. Like if I actually move this down here to ±6, it'll probably go up even more.
I float across the world in your big balloon. You made magic from my daydreams and turn my darkest hours to bright afternoon. I float across the world in your big balloon, and because of your love, I found faith in my destiny.
So the way that you sort of set this and work with this is that once you get your basic settings set, you find this level here, and what will happen is this indicator will grow to varying degrees of brightness of green, and indicating that it's interacting and responding to the music, and you find that setting somewhere in there that keeps the vocal most evenly following the dynamic of the music, and that's the basic idea of it. So it's very helpful for those types of things, especially if you spend a lot of time sort of evening out your vocal performance. This is like a great way to get it to kind of overall sort of respond to it. Generally what people will do is they'll go and it's like, okay, chorus sections make it louder, verse sections make it lower, and do like a general trim, with the automation. But this is a way of doing that from the backside. So it's not like a sidechain compressor. It's very different than a keyed compressor, because a keyed compression induces gain reduction. And so what's happening is it's more like an expansion type of thing, where it's actually increasing the gain overall, but really preserving a lot of the natural movement and rides that it will work at, but responding to the way the music is flowing. That's the basic idea of it. Okay, so there is our elongated explanation of the sidechain working in VocalRider, and that's our plugin of the week.